Mr. President, since the shutdown began 34 days ago, more than 800,000 federal workers have lost the security of knowing when their next paycheck will come. Tomorrow is the second paycheck they'll miss, meaning they have now gone more than a month without income. Yesterday, when I was in Austin and then in Dallas, I was told that people who routinely volunteer their time at the food bank in those locations now find themselves going to the food bank and seeking food so they can feed their families because they're missing a government paycheck and can't provide for them without the generosity of those food banks. I also went to events in Austin and Dallas, met with the U.S. attorneys in both of those locations, talking about our efforts to counter human trafficking and child exploitation. What I learned is that the prosecutors, the frontline prosecutors who prosecute these kinds of cases aren't being paid. But maybe more troublesome is the fact that either are the FBI agents that conduct the investigations or the administrative personnel that support the U.S. attorney's offices. So this is harming our ability to investigate and prosecute human trafficking and child exploitation cases too. People are being forced to work without pay, and it's harming not only them, but the victims of these horrific crimes. Mr. President, the Senate's not in order. Mr. President, more than 110,000 of these unpaid federal workers earn less than $50,000 a year, and they rely on their paycheck to make ends meet. They are not millionaires. While we did pass legislation to guarantee that these public servants will eventually get their pay, that does nothing to help them in the interim. Federal workers are forced to make decisions that no family should have to consider. For a single mom who's a federal correctional officer in Arizona, that means turning off her heat, never letting the temperature get higher than 60 or 65 degrees in order to cut costs. For a mom in Wisconsin who works in the Department of Interior, that means rationing her insulin because she can't afford the $300 copay. This shutdown is deeply impacting thousands of federal workers and their families all across the country, including Texas. For one Texan who works at the Internal Revenue Service, he says he's been sleeping in, so he only has to worry about eating 2 meals a day, not 3. One woman whose husband is in the Coast Guard drove from Galveston to Ellington Field, that's in Houston, about 40 miles each way to pick up free diapers for their kids. On a recent trip home, I heard specific examples about the impact the shutdown has had on the Department of Justice, which I mentioned just a moment ago, and the heartbreaking challenges they are facing every day. These dedicated men and women have chosen their careers in public service. They want to go to work. They want to be able to pay their bills. And it's time for us to do our job so they can do theirs with the dignity and the pay that they earn. I'd like to remind all our colleagues that our constituents did not send us to Washington so we could simply vote no on a less than perfect piece of legislation. If that were the case, we'd never get anything done here. We were elected to work with our colleagues to create legislation so we can get to yes, to build consensus and to solve problems, not to score political points. Are there certain pieces of legislation that I don't agree with? Well, of course. But parts of this legislation that we just voted on. But it does fund priorities critical to our southern border and to the people of Texas. And right now, this is the only bill that I've seen that includes priorities of both parties that carries the president's support. I voted for this legislation to support the men and women who have been treated as collateral damage throughout this unnecessary government shutdown. Those who are forced to apply for food stamps or unemployment, who would rather be working, who can't pay their medical bills or child care, who not only want this shutdown to end, they need for this shutdown to end. We aren't here to hold show votes on legislation that the president won't sign. Just ask the elementary school civics students, and they can tell you that's not how a bill becomes a law. This was a serious offer by the president to end this shutdown, and build the trust and goodwill necessary to have real reform. And I'm disappointed that our colleagues voted against this bill. That was a vote not on the merits of the president's proposal. That was a vote to get on the bill so it could be amended. In other words, our colleagues who voted against the bill aren't even interested in having a conversation about how we solve this problem and how we find our way out of this box canyon. And unfortunately, there are those who, for political reasons, continue to lack any interest in negotiating a compromise bill that could earn bipartisan support. We solve difficult problems every day in the United States Congress on a bipartisan basis, every single day. But somehow, we've decided we can't solve this problem, and I only fear that it's not because of the difficulty of the problem presented, it's because of the politics that have paralyzed us and made it impossible for us to bridge our differences. I thank the President for this comprehensive offer and the Majority Leader for bringing it to the floor so we can vote on it, And I would urge all of our colleagues now that we've had these two failed votes, we know we're right where we started when we got here today, that we work together to try to bridge our differences, to build consensus, and end this shutdown. Mr. President, I yield the floor.
The Senator from Wisconsin.
Is the Minority Leader on the floor?
Chair does not see him.
Yesterday, Chaplain Black opened the Senate by quoting the Gospel according to Luke. He said, "Those who work deserve their pay." I could not agree more. First of all, I want to thank the finest among us, members in the Coast Guard, TSA, Customs Border Protection, ICE, all the men and women who, because of federal law, we require to work, who are caught up in this shutdown politics, which I don't agree with, and they're not getting paid. It's a basic principle that we should pay these individuals. Earlier today, my colleague, Senator from Alaska, with other Republican colleagues, came on the floor asking a pretty simple question, proposing a bill to pay the men and women of the Coast Guard. And for some reason, the Minority Leader, the Democrats, objected to this very fair proposal. Today, I'm coming to the floor to offer as an amendment a bill that I introduced 10 days ago. This has been talked about in the press. We have, I think, 24 Republican co-sponsors of the Shutdown Fairness Act, which does a pretty simple thing. It simply pays those individuals that are doing the work trying to keep this nation safe. So let me just say that I ask unanimous consent, now that I see the Minority Leader here, I ask unanimous consent that the Senate proceed to the immediate consideration of calendar number 1, House Joint Resolution 1. I ask unanimous consent that the Johnson Amendment at the desk be agreed to, the bill as amended be considered, read a third time and passed, and that the motion to reconsider be considered and made and laid upon the table.
Is there an objection?
Now, I heard my good friend from Wisconsin say he didn't give one good reason to object to the Coast Guard. No, there's not one. There are 740,000, or 760,000, if that's the right number, the number of non-Coast Guard workers who are not getting paid. Similarly here, it will be easy for any member to get up and pick and choose and say, pay these, pay those, don't pay these, don't pay those. Our position on this side is simple. They should not be held hostage. They should not be said, we're not going to pay you unless we get our way on the wall, which is exactly what President Trump is doing and exactly what my colleagues, with some exceptions, have decided to do on that side of the aisle, including my good friend from Wisconsin. That is not fair. Everyone deserves to be paid. These are all hardworking people. They've all done nothing wrong. They all get up Monday morning, even if they have a fever or something, to go to work because they believe in what they're doing. They're government workers. And to pick and choose some and not others is the wrong way to go and would lead to a cacophony. Every one of us could get up and say, maybe we should say just pay the workers in Brooklyn, New York. I mean, it doesn't make any sense at all. And so I would modify my friend's objection. I'd expand it to all of our federal workers, which is only fair. So, reserving the right to object, would the senator modify his request to ask unanimous consent that the Senate proceed to the immediate consideration of H.J. Res. 28, which has been received from the House, making further additional continuing appropriations through February 28th, that the joint resolution be considered, read a third time and passed, and the motion to reconsider be made and laid upon the table with no intervening action or debate.
Does the senator from Wisconsin so modify his request?
I do object because we basically just voted on that. The Senate, in its wisdom, voted that down. The president would not sign that. That would not become law. And it's the minority leader who's holding 400-some thousand individuals who are actually working that should get pay. He is the one holding them hostage. But I'd like to yield to the senator from Tennessee.
No,
to hear his
I
comments.
object to that. I am in the middle of an objection. Okay? Then he can speak. In fact,
The objection to the modification is heard.
Leader McConnell has requested I go to his office. I think that's more important than some of these activities. And I am going to object.
The Democratic leader does not have the floor. Does the Democratic leader object to the original request? Objection is heard. The senator from Wisconsin.
Now, Mr. President, I'd like to turn it over to the senator from Tennessee for a few comments.
Is there objection? Without objection.
When 60 seconds is up, so the senator from Alaska can have 60 seconds, and then we can go on to the colloquy that people have been waiting for.
Is there objection? Without objection.
Mr. President, this is what we just heard. The senator from Wisconsin said he asked consent that the Senate approve paying the 400,000 workers who are being forced to work without pay. No Republican objects to the senator from Wisconsin's idea, but the Democratic leader does. That means the Democratic leader is saying to 53,000 TSA employees who make about $40,000 a year that he objects, on behalf of the Democratic side, to paying them while they're forced to work. He is saying to 54,000 Customs and Border Protection agents that he objects to paying them while they are forced to work. Senator Johnson says that on the Republican side, we want to pay 42,000 Coast Guard employees who are forced to work and aren't paid. The Democratic leader says he objects to that. And to 14,000 air traffic controllers, 16,000 Bureau of Prisons corrections officers, 35,000 IRS employees. They are being forced to work. Republicans are saying, pay them. The Democratic leader objects.
Mr. President. Mr. President.
The senator from Delaware, or from Maryland.
Close by. Mr. President, I had previously notified the floor about a group of senators that want to join together to send a clear message that we are committed to working together to end this shutdown and responsibly dealing with border security in a true bipartisan manner. This is a group of equal number of Democrats and Republicans. Senator Murkowski is leading this on the Republican side on the floor today. And I would ask consent that for the next hour, the two of us have, that we control 30 minutes of time that I control and 30 minutes of time that Senator Murkowski would control.
Is there objection? Without objection.
Mr. President, during this floor time, I think you're going to see clear messages coming from Democratic senators and Republican senators that this shutdown needs to end, that we need to pass a short-term 3-week clean CR so that we can have time to consider the President's request and work together on a bipartisan border security package. I want my colleagues to know that we have been meeting regularly in an effort to try to see where we can find common ground. And we feel pretty confident that we can find common ground if we can get government open and get to work in a responsible manner to deal with border security in the best interest of the people of this nation. Mr. President, I want to first yield to my friend from Virginia, Senator Warner, and then I will yield time. I will give up the floor to Senator Murkowski.
Mr. President.
The senator from Virginia.
Mr. President, I appreciate my friend, the Senator from Maryland, yielding time, and I appreciate the fact that this may be the first time, at least in the last few weeks, where a group of senators from both sides of the aisle are actually coming together to find agreement. Not to score gotcha points, but to find agreement. I promise the Senator I'd be very brief. It is clear this government shutdown needs to come to an end. My hope would be, as we move towards that conclusion, we will also look at the issues revolving around particularly low-paid federal contractors who will get no relief when the government reopens. I also hope that we could work together. I've got legislation called the Stop Stupidity Act, good name, that may need further amendment that would try to prohibit future shutdowns being used by either party on a going-forward basis. What I think we need to do, and I think other colleagues will acknowledge this, is let's take a 3-week short-term CR. Let's consider the president's proposal. And let me be clear, if the president is watching, this senator would commit to good faith negotiations. This senator will commit to supporting increased border security beyond what we just voted on the so-called Democratic proposal. That kind of commitment for increased border security, I hope the president would take as a good faith effort and would be responded so we could get this government reopened on the short-term basis, and the kind of horror stories we all can recount about our workers, contractors, and oftentimes private businesses that surround those federal entities, federal installations, who will see no relief, can actually get their operations back opening. I had a much more articulate additional 3 minutes worth, which I will submit for the record. Thank my friend, the senator from Maryland, for granting me this time. Thank the senator from Alaska for leadership on her time. But let's see if this 8 can go forth and multiply, so that before this weekend is over, we can get our workforce back to work doing the people's business. With that, Mr. President, I yield back to the senator from Maryland.
Mr. President.
Senator from Alaska.
Mr. President, I appreciate colleagues being down here again on a bipartisan basis to talk about where we are at this moment. We've just had 2 messaging votes. Both of those votes failed. I voted for both of them because my message was, I want to get this government open. I want to do it quickly and with the sense of urgency that responds to the men and women who have been so significantly impacted by this partial government shutdown for the past 34 days. I also want to be fair to the president's priorities that he's articulated in the proposal that he has provided to us as recently as Saturday. I think we can do this together. So my message to folks back home, my message to people is, don't give up hope, because now is the time that we all must come together to address these issues. But you can't do it when the government is shut down. So I have indicated that I am supportive of a measure that Senator from Maryland, Senator Cardin, has introduced that will allow for a short-term CR, 3 weeks, allow us then to go through, whether it's the appropriations process, the Judiciary Committee process, but allow us to have this debate on these important priorities. Allow us to do the business of the United States Senate, to do the business of legislating. But let's also allow the business of the government to proceed by opening up the government right now. So we'll have an opportunity to go back and forth amongst colleagues. I'll remind folks that we have very limited periods of time, so I'm going to yield to my colleagues on the other side. But it's so important that we're coming together now to offer some glimmer of hope.
Thank you. And I couldn't agree more, Mr. President.
Senator from Maryland.
I couldn't agree more with my friend from Alaska, the way that she worded it. We're going to work together to get government opened as quickly as possible. And with that, I would yield to my friend from Delaware, Senator Coons.
Senator from Delaware.
Thank you, Mr. President, and I'd like to thank my colleagues from Alaska, from Maryland, and from other states for their willingness to spend so much time talking, listening, and trying together to craft a path forward. The role the Senate has historically played in our constitutional order is one where we are the body that others look to when there is either an inflexibility or an unreliability in negotiating a path forward. We've got lots of folks across this country suffering from this government shutdown. It's having an impact that all of us could detail. But I have to ask, what's it going to take for us to reopen this government? Is it going to take a breakdown in food security or airline security? Is it going to take an increase in crime or terrorism, an accident, or thousands more Americans struggling to feed their families, losing housing or electricity? I won't go on with the list, but we all know the human cost of this shutdown. I'm here to join my friends, my colleagues from both parties, in saying that we are intent on making a good faith effort to reopen the government for 3 weeks, to promptly support good faith negotiations, to address the president's priorities, to discuss what effective modern investments in border security and changes in immigration policy would look like, and then reach a resolution in 3 weeks or less. We have to be able to do this. We have to show our country and the world that democracy can work, and I am optimistic that with the passion and the commitment I've heard from my bipartisan colleagues who stand on the floor with me tonight, that it is possible to get this done, and that whatever gets taken up and considered in regular order by this body could then be passed by the House and signed into law by the President. Let us take a first bold step together today and sign on to an amendment that my colleague from Maryland has, committing us to a clean 3-week continuing resolution, reopening the government, and promptly negotiating in good faith to increase investment in border security. Mr. President, thank you. And with that, I yield the floor.
That the senator from Maine be recognized at this time.
The senator from Maine.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, this shutdown, the longest in our history, must come to an end. It has already caused far too much harm to 800,000 dedicated federal employees and their families who are struggling to pay bills without paychecks and are on the verge of missing yet another paycheck. It has hurt the American people who need to interact with federal agencies, including seniors, low-income families, people with disabilities who worry about their housing assistance. It's damaging our economy, causing a drop in consumer confidence and consumer spending. Ironically, shutdowns always end up costing the government more money than if we had operated as we should. Mr. President, I see a glimmer of hope here. We at least have had 2 votes today on 2 different plans. And like the senator from Alaska and others, I supported both plans because my priority is to reopen government. But where I am really optimistic is the fact that 16 senators are on the floor, equally divided between the 2 parties, and willing to compromise. Compromise is not a dirty word. It is not a sign of weakness. It is a sign of strength. Let us compromise to reopen government, address border security, and get on with the business of this country. Thank you, Mr. President.
President.
Senator from Maryland.
At this time, I would yield to my colleague from Arizona, Senator Sinema.
The senator from Arizona.
Thank you, Mr. President. I want to start by thanking my colleague from Maryland and from Alaska for bringing us together today, but also for the work that our group has been putting in for the last several weeks to find a solution to end this harmful and hurtful shutdown. The voters of Arizona want a government that is lean, that allows them to pursue their individual interests, and that above all does not detract from their everyday life. And unfortunately, when the federal government is shut down as it is today, it detracts and takes away from the quality of life for folks in Arizona. Recently, the President asked the United States Congress to consider appropriations for border security, and I stand in support of working together across the aisle with my colleagues here in the Senate to answer that request. Arizona needs enhanced funding for border security, and I feel confident that if given 3 weeks, the Republicans and Democrats together in this body could find a reasonable compromise that both continues to keep our government operating in a lean and efficient way while also providing for efficient and effective border security. In Arizona, we bear the brunt of a government that has failed its duty to secure our border and protect our communities. In Arizona, we bear the brunt of our country's failure to solve the immigration crises that we live in today. In Arizona, we have been waiting for over 3 decades for the United States Congress to solve this problem so that we in Arizona can live our lives free from unnecessary government interference and with the full freedom that our country has promised us. I believe that if we work together over the next 3 weeks, that we can find a compromise, we can find a solution to this challenge, and we can work with our colleagues in the House and send a piece of legislation to the President that will meet the security needs of our country and ensure that we keep government operating efficiently and effectively for the people of my state and for this country. I look forward to working over the next several weeks to solve this challenge, and I request that the President allow us those 3 weeks to find this bipartisan solution together. Thank you, Mr. President. I yield back.
Mr. President, I would ask that the senator from South Carolina be recognized.
The senator from South Carolina.
Thank you. Just got off the phone with the president. I told him we're talking about a 3-week CR, and all of us believe if we had 3 weeks with the government open, with all the discord coming from a shutdown, that we could find a way forward to produce a bill that he would sign that would be good for everybody in the country, but we need that opportunity. He gave me some indications of things he would want for a 3-week CR that would be good faith, down payment on moving forward that I thought were eminently reasonable. Rather than me telling you about what he said, I think Senator Schumer and Senator McConnell will be talking about this. So the 3-week CR concept is a good idea, and what the president wants to add to it made sense to me, and it gets us back in the ballgame. Here's what's going to happen. The TPS language that was sent over by the president is a move forward, but it's unacceptable to my Democratic colleagues. It needs to be like what Tim Kaine did. The DACA provision sent over by the president is moving forward, but it needs to be what Senator Durbin did, because they're both, I think, reasonable proposals that the president should be able to accept. To my Democratic friends, money for a barrier is required to get this deal done. It will not be a concrete wall, and the money will be programmed to a DHS plan that all of you know about and have been briefed on and should approve. You're not giving President Trump a bunch of money to do anything he wants to with. He's got to spend it on a plan that the professionals have come up with. You want $800 million for refugee assistance, you'll get it. We all need more judges. 250 more Border Patrol agents on the border would be good for us all. I want to let the public know I've never been more optimistic than I am now if we can find a way to open up the government for 3 weeks. If we fail, everybody can say we did our best, one last chance to get this right. And I'm just hoping and praying that what the president's asking for, Senator Cardin, in addition to your 3-week CR, you'll entertain, and let's get to work. If we could get in a room, we'll fix this, and it won't take 3 weeks.
Mr. President.
Senator from Maryland.
I'm now pleased to yield to my colleague from Maryland, Senator Van Hollen, who's been a real partner during his stay here in the United States Senate. We've traveled the state of Maryland together, and we know firsthand the hardships of this shutdown. We've seen the faces and we've seen the consequences. Yield to my colleague, Senator Viahan.
The other senator from Maryland.
Thank you, Mr. President. I thank my friend and partner from Maryland for all his work in ending the shutdown. And I want to thank him as well as our friend, Senator from Alaska, Senator Murkowski, for bringing us together in a bipartisan way to try to find a solution to end this shutdown as soon as possible. And that's why I support the bipartisan amendment that will be filed this afternoon to open the government for 3 weeks. I should stress, Mr. President, this is not my preferred solution. I would like to take up the bill that's at the desk that would open 8 of the 9 federal departments right away and give us time to deal with the Department of Homeland Security. But the proposal before us is our best option at this point in time for resolving this shutdown. What will 3 weeks accomplish? That's a fair question. Well, first of all, it will allow federal government employees, all of them, to get back to work for the American people, to help resume vital services. Number 2, it will make sure that all of them get paid, both those who are working without pay and those who have been locked out. And that's important because all of us know that tomorrow marks the second full pay period when they will get a big fat zero on their paychecks, even as their bills keep coming in the door. It'll also do something else that's very important. It will give the Senate and the House a little breathing room to work together on a bipartisan basis to address a number of priorities. Priorities to make sure that we provide adequate border security, and that can include additional resources. Spend some time to address some immigration issues, including those that were just mentioned by the senator from South Carolina. But this time and space, Mr. President, is absolutely needed, I believe, to allow us to work together in a bipartisan way. And while 3 weeks may not sound like a lot of time, in part that will help focus our attention on getting the job done. And we will all be held accountable in the House and the Senate and the White House for getting our work done in that period. So I want to thank our colleagues for showing this good faith in trying to find a solution to doing it. Take 3 weeks, open the government, and let's have those very important discussions. Let's do it in a sober and serious way. And if we do so, I'm confident that we can find a permanent result that will help us get out of this crisis. And I thank the senator and yield back my time.
Mr. President.
Senator from Alaska.
Request that we yield to the senator from Georgia.
I thank the senator from Alaska.
The senator from Georgia.
All Democrats and Republicans pay close attention. I've been here 20 years. I've seen a lot of shutdowns, about 5 of them. I want to talk about what they produced. The first one under Bill Clinton produced Monica Lewinsky. That's how they got in all the trouble, because she was an intern in the White House, and idle hands are never good. For us, Newt Gingrich lost his job in the same shutdown. He lost his job because he lost 6 votes in the House, couldn't get reelected Speaker. I had to replace him, and I'm kind of glad that happened, but that's still not a good result and not a good reason to have a shutdown. A few years later, great senators, John McCain being one of them, Ted Kennedy being another, worked their fingers to the bone and came up with a great immigration bill, which I was a part of in my first term in the Senate. And we got castigated and ruined because all of a sudden amnesty became a 4-letter word. And political consultants found it an easy way to run against people in the party. And so for 15 years, we've been beating each other over something that ought to be easy to do. And that's changed for the better. You know, a lot of people think Congress's job is to come to Washington and change things for the better. When it comes to immigration, all we ever change is the subject. We never end the debate. We never pass a result. And oftentimes we call each other names for the wrong reason. I'm here for one reason, to thank the colleagues that are on the floor here and all those others who are ready to do some business. I'm ready to do some business. It's time we put the good workers in our government back to work. It's time we were doing what we promised the people in the United States of America to do, and it's time we went to work. Because when everybody's out of work, it's our fault. They're the people that carry the mail, empty the garbage, cook in the cafeteria, clean up the parks, do everything. They do it without complaint whatsoever. But they're out there, many of them not even being paid right now, while we're sitting here debating a subject that we can't reach a solution on, period. We need to take our armor off, leave our weapons at the door, walk in the room, shake hands, grab Ben Cardin's hand and say, Ben, thank you for making an effort as a Democrat. Lisa, thank you as a Republican for supporting it. And let's sit down and let's pass a bill that we can both agree on that gets Americans back to work and restores the spirit of Ellis Island and the pride of the United States of America. And I yield back.
Mr. President,
Senator from Maryland.
I've joined Senator Isaacson on many bills in this since I've been in the Senate. So I look forward to working with him to find a solution in regards to the border security issues, and I thank him for his comments. I'll yield now to my colleague from Maine, Senator King, who's been so instrumental in trying to come up with concrete ways to end this shutdown.
Mr. President.
The Senator from Maine.
Mr. President, it strikes me that there are really two problems before us. One we can resolve in this evening, tomorrow morning, in the next 24 hours. That is the shutdown. Or at least we can resolve it for a limited period of time, and then we can start talking about the second problem, which is border security. I think one of the unfortunate realities of what's happened in the last month is an assumption on the part of some that there was not good faith on border security and no interest in doing border security from this side of the aisle. That is a misunderstanding. I voted in 2013 for the largest border security provision that I think has ever come before the United States Senate. So did virtually every member of this caucus, and a third or more of the other caucus. 2/3 of the Senate voted for that bill with a very important border security provision. I want to be very clear. I am very supportive of border security and increasing border security. There also may be cases where there are parts of the border where some kind of barrier makes sense and is cost effective, whereas there are other areas of the border where it doesn't. What I'm interested in is a thorough discussion with the experts about what is the most cost-effective way to protect our citizens and secure the border, and I believe this proposal today gives us the breathing space to have that discussion. I would remind my colleagues that the administration, this administration, submitted a border security proposal to the Congress last February with their budget of $1.6 billion, and lo and behold, that was approved by the Appropriations Committee and by this body. So that's an indication to me that there is good faith. And I think the important thing to communicate now is let's not complicate this with conditions. Let's take the hammer, the awful hammer, and I don't have to reiterate all that's been said today about the devastating effect of this shutdown on people in all of our states and on people who are working for no pay, which is fundamentally wrong. We should take that away and then spend the next 3 weeks finding a solution, which I believe we can do. I've had enough discussions with my colleagues on both sides of the aisle. I think there's a solution to be had that will satisfy the President, the two bodies of Congress, but most importantly, the American people in terms of the protection that we can provide. So I'm happy to join my colleague today in supporting this message, and importantly, my colleagues across the aisle, because give us a breathing space, take the problem of the shutdown away, and then we can have a discussion and debate and find a solution through a process that is the way it ought to be, not with a shutdown being something that's hanging over everyone. That's not the way we should be governing, and I look forward to working with my colleagues on finding a creative, cost-effective, and safe solution to this issue of border security to protect this country. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I yield the floor.
Mr. President, how much time remaining on the Republican side?
21 minutes.
Thank you. I now turn to the senator from Ohio.
I thank my colleague from Alaska. Thanks for her leadership today, and my colleague from Maine who just spoke, and from Maryland, and all of my colleagues who are out here on the floor. By the way, there are several Republicans who came up to me over the last hour and said, can I speak in this colloquy? And we didn't have time for all of them, but that's a good sign. It shows that there are a lot of members, 16 here on the floor, and many others who believe that it's time for us to figure this out. No one likes a government shutdown. I put out a bill 5 times now to the Congress saying let's end government shutdowns. It, by the way, is getting a few more co-sponsors now, and it should, because it doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense for the families who are affected, including those who are going to work without pay, living paycheck to paycheck, true hardship. It doesn't make sense for the taxpayers who never end up winning in these government shutdowns. we end up paying after the fact, but often for government services that were never provided, because that's how shutdowns work. And finally, it's bad for the economy. If we go another few weeks, there'll be 1 point off our GDP, which is a huge deal to wages and jobs, economic growth. So let's get this thing behind us. Now, there is a serious issue here, which is how do we secure the border? And our southern border is a mess. I call it a crisis. Others call it something else, but we have to address this. The president's right about that. I'm hopeful today, and I'm hopeful for 3 reasons. One, we just went through a process where, yeah, there was failure on both sides. We had 2 proposals out there as expected. Nobody expected they would pass. It was an opportunity, I guess, for voices to be heard, but no one expected it to pass. But now, after this, the pieces are being put back together by this group and others. And I just listened to my colleagues on the other side, and I just listened to what Senator King said. They want border security. They want to enhance what's going on in the border now. Senator King just talked about the need for more barriers. I mean, look, if you're serious about this, you have to acknowledge that what we know is there are more people crossing. In the last 2 months, which we have records for, there were twice as many as a year ago. There's about a 50% increase in families crossing, about a 25% increase in kids crossing. There's been a 3,000% increase in the last 5 years in asylums being, people coming forward and claiming asylum. And this is a problem we've got to address. It's a huge problem with regard to drugs. Now, I come from Ohio. We're getting hit hard by heroin and crystal meth that's coming across the border from Mexico, and we're not stopping enough of it. We're stopping very little of it, which is why Democrats and Republicans alike have said more screening at ports of entry. I agree. So I appreciate what my colleagues have said on the other side of the aisle, and I'll let them speak for themselves going forward, but they want border security too. And the fact they were talking about it today in terms of coming up with a solution here to enhance security, I'm encouraged by. Second, I like the fact that the president put out a proposal. I think he should have put out a proposal that was a compromise, and he did, because he said, okay, we're not just going to have more border security, we're going to deal with about 1 million people who are in temporary protected status coming from these 10 countries. We don't want to send them back because there's a war or there's strife or there's a natural disaster. It's about 400,000 people. And we're going to take care of the people who have come here as children through no fault of their own and now find themselves in this uncertain status. These are the so-called DACA recipients. It's time for Congress to act on this, I think. But again, the president put forward a plan that said, okay, you guys help me on border security. I'm also going to deal with these other issues that many Democrats have talked about for years. So that makes me hopeful that finally we're talking about these issues. And I agree with what Lindsey Graham said. We can do more on these two. And we can do more on some other issues that Democrats care about. And I believe the administration is willing to do that. But gosh, at least we're finally talking. Finally, I'm encouraged by the fact that we're not that far apart. And let me be specific. I think that both the administration and Democrats have mischaracterized the president's plan as it relates to barriers on the southern border. It may surprise you to learn that in the president's proposal he's just given us, it's not 2,000 miles of the border. He's talking about his interest in 234 more miles. No wall in the sense of a cement wall, concrete wall. He has said it'll be fences, it'll be vehicle barriers, low barriers, it'll be pedestrian wire fences, but it won't be done by what the White House says is the right thing to do. It'll be done by experts, and the experts are in the Border Security Improvement Plan, which we embraced in this Congress in the last appropriation bill for FY18 that we're working on now. That's what the CR is, and in the new one that was just passed last summer. We said this plan is the right plan because it says what kind of barriers are going to be where. People said, how did the president come up with $5.7 billion? You know how he came up with it? Because he wanted to fund the top 10 priorities of the Border Security Improvement Plan put out by the experts. That's what that is. Now, we can disagree on whether that's too much money, too little money, whatever, but it is only 234 miles out of 2,000 miles. It's almost all in Texas, places where there's not fencing as opposed to California and Arizona where there's a lot of fencing, or New Mexico even. And we can say, well, maybe that's too much. Maybe we go more slowly. But this is a plan that we had all, as Republicans and Democrats, with a huge vote out of the Appropriations Committee, said this is the plan we ought to follow. So I don't think we're that far apart. I think both sides, frankly, need to start characterizing the plan accurately and stop talking past each other. And I think if we do that with reasonable members on both sides of the aisle here, we can come up with something that makes sense. Yes, to help secure our southern border, which everybody wants to do, and do it in a smart way, not waste money. Walls are not the only answer. Fences are not the only answer. You've got to have more sensors, more cameras. You've got to have more immigration judges, which Democrats want. So does the president in his proposal. You've got to have more screening for these drugs coming in. You've got to help in terms of the human trafficking. These are things that both parties want to do. So I'm optimistic, though frustrated, really frustrated by their shutdown, but more optimistic today because I hear on the other side of the aisle a willingness to come forward. I sense with the president's new proposal there's a willingness to reach out. And folks, it's time. Let's stop this shutdown. Shutdowns are stupid. Let's protect that southern border, and let's move forward on other priorities we have in this Congress.
Mr. President.
Senator from Maryland.
I certainly appreciate the words from Senator Portman. The two of us have been working together from when we were in the House of Representatives, and we're proud that we have a record of concrete accomplishments working together across party line. Sometimes we had to take on the leadership in both of our parties, but we got things done. So I'm encouraged by your comments, and I really do believe we can work together to resolve this issue. And with that, I'd like to yield to my colleague from West Virginia, Senator Manchin, who's been a real leader on the practical impact of this shutdown has. A story about what's happening in the prison that's located in West Virginia really frightened, I think, all of us.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you, Senator Cardin. Thank you, Senator Murkowski, Senator Collins, all my colleagues here. This is a good step. We're all here the first time after 30 days. But guess what? If you've been back home talking to the people that are hurting, they have no idea why we're doing what we're doing and allowing them to be harmed the way they are. I voted for both proposals today. I'll vote for whatever it takes to get us back in a room to make something happen, open the government up. I'm understanding that the CR works this way. If we have a CR, then there's going to be proportionally 3 weeks of money still being used for DHS for border security. I understand that's how it works. It's based on $1.3 billion last year as a PROPS. A CR continues the spending from last year, so there'd be money there to continue on in good faith. I don't think any of us would want to come back 3 weeks from now and say, it's your fault for shutting it down. No, it's the president's fault. No, it's our fault. No one wants to go through that. I don't know why the 3 weeks is unreasonable for anybody if it's presented properly to the president that you're going to have continuation of money proportionately to the 3 weeks that we're going to be in that CR. But the thing that I can't understand is I'm hearing that the president wants 5.7. Senator Portman just told us where that came from the people who are expertise and should know, Custom Border Patrol people. I'm understanding also, I heard this morning, some of the leadership from the Democrats on the House side saying that they would consider 5.7, but for anything but a wall. That means they know we need border security, but they have a different idea how to secure the border. Well, guess what? If you want to spend 5.7 for a border security, the president wants to spend 5.7 for border security. Surely we can sit down in that 3 week period and figure out by talking to the professionals what needs to be done where our greatest risks are. How do we stop the opiates and all the drugs that are coming in? It's ravaged my state. It is horrible what my state is going through. And on top of that, I've got people that are working for the federal government, about 12,000. I have never seen more people impacted. And all they're saying is this: you people really don't care because none of you are hurting. You talk a good game. You play a lot of words back and forth, but no one's hurting. We're the ones hurting. Then I've got essentials working in prisons, and basically most of our prisons are in very rural areas. The average drive time to our prison is 1 hour. The prison I'm talking about, which is Hazleton, 1 hour. People are making decisions. They're not going to work because they're upset and mad. They know their responsibilities, but here's their other responsibility. They got to make a decision because they got no cash. What little bit of money I've got in resources, do I put gas in the tank or do I put food on the table for the kids? One of the two. Now we're trying to work out, because we don't know how long this is going to happen, how they're going to basically be carpool or transportation, public transportation, that we can get. Guess what? Public transportation is starting to shut down too. The buses are starting to shut down. The way that we could get them to work in masses. But guys, let me tell you, I have been in public service like all of you, and I think we were all in it for the right reason. We wanted to truly serve the public. We're not serving the public, and we're all guilty, every one of us. I don't care how you voted on bills. I don't care what we talk about. We are all getting painted with the same brush right now. No one's going to escape this. And it is absolutely horrific what's being done. I've always said this: government should be your partner and your ally, not your adversary. And right now, government is the enemy of the people that basically are providing the services that people depend on and protecting us. This is why this has got to stop. So I'm saying to the President, Mr. President, please give us the 3 weeks. We understand we need border security. Basically, our colleagues on the other side understand there should be compassion. When you have a child that was brought here 2 days old, 2 weeks old, 2 months old, and now is an adult and has no idea how they got here, but they'd like to enjoy the fruits and be able to give something back to this country, there ought to be a pathway forward. These are things that we all seem to agree on at certain times. And I, along with many of the senators who were here in 2013, voted for one of the biggest packages we've ever had. $44 billion in security, basically border security, and not one person could get a pathway to citizenship or become a citizen of this great country if they were not here for the right reason. They might have got here the wrong way, but they came for the right reason, should they not have an opportunity. And they could not become a citizen after 10 or 13 years until we secured the border. That's what this was all about. And now we're fighting over whatever. I don't know. I can't even explain it when I go back home. So I tell them, I said, listen, I'm for border security. I will vote for border security. I'll vote compassionately to try to help people find a pathway to be an American citizen also, especially children. The other thing is, I think that we can find a way, a pathway forward. The President will give us the 3 weeks. And I guarantee you, I don't think any of us will vote for another shutdown or let this happen. But you can't let it go another day longer. We cannot leave here until we fix this. Because the people back home says, any way you're going to fix it, I'll tell you. And when you're hurting as bad as I'm hurting, why don't you all stop your pay? How come you're still getting a pay? Oh, yeah, you fix that because that's a constitutional amendment. You're taken care of, and it's out of your hands. You can't deny your pay. It's going to come. They says, I'll tell you, this will never happen again. If the day that basically a shutdown begins, every congressperson, every senator, all 535, the president, and everybody that works in that White House over there that's making policy, everybody's pay stops. I guarantee you one thing, we'll work around the clock. We'll work around the clock to prevent another shutdown. And I cannot disagree with him. So I'm saying I'm all in. I am all in. I'll do whatever it takes. I'll stay here 24/7. I'll do whatever it takes to bring people back together, but most importantly, get people back to work. And we can do that and still have border security and have some compassion for the people that hurt the most. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. President.
Senator from Alaska.
Mr. President, that's exactly why we're here, is to get this government open, get people paid, get people back to work. Let me turn to the senator from Louisiana.
Thank you. Mr. President.
Senator from Louisiana.
Mr. President, if I was sitting at home or in the gallery right now, I'd be incredibly frustrated. I'm frustrated, but if I was home, I'd be particularly frustrated. Why? Think of what we agree upon in this colloquy from both the Democratic and the Republican side of the aisle. We agree that border security is important. We agree that it is one of the primary functions of the federal government. We agree that there needs to be more money. And although in legislation we've not agreed, we certainly have statements from Democrats, of course, as well as Republicans, that barriers are also important. Colin Peterson, a Democrat on the House side, put it well. I'm quoting him, give Trump the money. I'd give him the whole thing. Put strings on it so you make sure he puts the walls where it needs to be. Why are we fighting over this? We're going to build that wall anyway at some time. That was from January 22nd, 2019. And my Democratic Senate colleagues have said something along the same line. Maybe not as point blank, but they certainly have said it. We agree there. We agree that the American worker who continues to show up but is not getting paid needs to get paid. Those TSA agents, those flight controllers that we use as we go back and forth to our districts, God bless them. More than 51,000 TSA agents working without pay. 10,000 air traffic controllers support staff remain furloughed. By the way, I and others have introduced legislation to pay those while they are working, and I think it is something we, the Senate, should take up. We need a solution that fulfills our national security responsibilities, ends the shutdown, and these workers get paid. Now, I would say it's time to move forward, negotiate, and come to the table. But you may ask, if Democrat and Republican senators are all agreeing on this, Why is it not happening? In fairness to President Trump, whose rhetoric sometimes inflames and sometimes pushes off, and as my colleague from Ohio said, sometimes describe things in a way which misrepresents his actual intent. It is not a wall from the Gulf of Mexico to the Pacific Ocean. It is a wall in certain places that are high flow with pedestrian traffic. But nonetheless, clearly we've come to a point where a personality conflict between the president and the speaker has put them at loggerheads and apparently unable to negotiate. It's clear from our colloquy that senators on both sides of the aisle would like to come to a solution that secures the southern border, opens the government, and pays the worker. And in fairness to the president, he's put forward an opening offer. He has said he wants that money for the barrier, but he's put other issues on the table that are near and dear to Democrats' heart that hopefully would open the way to a compromise. The way I can imagine it would work is that the speaker, she would put forward a counter proposal. I think that's where we need to be, to rise above any personal dislike or any entrenched positions that people have come to, but rather come to a point where we recognize that the American people are better served if the folks serving them are getting paid, and that it is important to secure our southern border, and that some sort of barrier will be part of that, as members of both parties have agreed to. So it's time to move forward. It's time to negotiate. It's time for the two principals to come to some sort of compromise. Clearly, we in the Senate are willing to move forward. So, Mr. President, with that, I yield the floor.
Mr. President.
Senator from Maryland.
I'm pleased to yield to my colleague from New Hampshire, Senator Hassan.
Thank you, Senator Cardin. Mr. President.
The senator from New Hampshire.
Thank you, Mr. President. I join with my colleagues here in saying how disappointed I was that today's vote to reopen the government immediately while we keep negotiating to address border security was defeated. But I am encouraged by the bipartisan group on the Senate floor with me this afternoon to send one clear message. Let's pass a clean 3-week continuing resolution to reopen the government immediately. And each of us is committed to working to pass a strong bipartisan border security bill during that 3-week period. Like many of my colleagues, I've gone down to the border. I've talked to our frontline personnel on the border. There is a lot of common ground about what we need to strengthen our border security. And I join my colleagues here and thank Senators Cardin and Murkowski for organizing us in saying that we can get to a solution on border security, but we need to open the government right away. There is no reason to keep the government closed while negotiations on strengthening border security continue. And in fact, there is concern that negotiations forced by shutdown sets a dangerous precedent. So I strongly urge my colleagues from both parties to support this bipartisan approach. I thank Senators Graham and Cardin, too, for their leadership in this effort, and I'm committed to working with them and the rest of this bipartisan group to find a way forward. Every day that this senseless shutdown continues, it is hurting people in New Hampshire and across the country. We have all been sharing stories. We have heard the stories. We have talked to the hardworking men and women who serve the people of this country, who are doing their work without pay or are furloughed and really don't know how they're going to make their next mortgage payment, their next utility payment, and put food on the table, get their medication, all of the things that they need a good day's wages to do. So we need to end this now. I join with my colleagues in being here this afternoon to simply say that we need to open the government and that I am committed, as so many, all of us are, to negotiate in good faith going forward to find a solution on border security. Thank you, Mr. President, and I yield the floor.
Mr. President.
Senator from Alaska.
Mr. President, I turn to my colleague from Iowa.
Thank you very much, Senator Murkowski and Senator Cardin. Thank you for your leadership today in organizing this floor colloquy. Mr. President, thank you very much. I do want to join my colleagues in expressing how urgent it is that we not only secure our borders, but that we open our government. We really do have to come together. We've got two sides of the aisle here, our Democrats and our Republican friends. Certainly, we can come to a solution. We've got to figure out a path forward, folks, and I'm glad that we're here to do that. We have a duty to provide for our nation's security, and it's also our job to fund the government. We just voted on a sensible and smart proposal offered by the president that every Democrat and Republican should have supported, but unfortunately, it was rejected today. You know, back home, our hardworking Iowans and, of course, Americans all across the country, they're tired of government shutdowns, and they are disappointed in the dysfunction of Washington, D.C. The impacts of this government shutdown are tangible for families. They feel it. People are hurting all across this nation. Most families don't have a rainy day fund. Money only lasts so long when you have zero income. Prolonged periods without a paycheck are unsustainable. I have a friend who works for federal law enforcement, and fortunately, he's up in seniority, but he told me the other day, he said, Joni, our young workers, our young federal workers, they just can't make ends meet. Children don't stop growing, people don't stop getting sick, and the obligations of caring for families don't stop just because we have. Washington has stopped working, folks. We've got to get it together. I've heard from businesses on the brink of collapse. I've heard from first-time home buyers that are trapped in limbo right now. And there are serious consequences that I've heard about from our farmers who work every day with the United States Department of Agriculture, the USDA. Our food banks, our churches, and other charities that spend their time and their resources helping families and communities through these tough times, helping those furloughed workers and those who are in need. They're running out of resources. They're running out of time, and it only can last so long. We need our DOJ working to stop crime and violence. We need our vital government agencies back up and running. We can do that. I support a stronger border, and I support the president's sensible proposal, which does include a barrier, manpower, ports of entry, technology, and infrastructure. I think it's necessary that these investments be part of an overall deal. Our lack of border security has resulted in a humanitarian crisis at the border. We have tens of thousands of illegals and inadmissible immigrants on our southern border every month. I agree with President Trump and many of my colleagues that securing our southern border is a must-do to discourage illegal immigration, curb the human trafficking, stop drugs, stop gun trafficking, in addition to stopping the ability of gangs and terrorists to exploit the holes in our system. You know what, folks? The American people expect us to do better. We have an opportunity to step up and do the right thing, and that's find a solution. We have to do it by working together. So again, I want to thank all of my colleagues for coming together today on the floor. Again, Senator Cardin, Senator Murkowski, thank you for organizing the effort, and hopefully we will come to a solution. So, folks, the nation is watching us. We can do better. I'll yield the floor.
Thank you to the senator from Iowa. Question to the president in terms of how much time remaining on the Republican side.
6 minutes.
All right, perfect. We're down to remaining 2 speakers, and we got 3 minutes each. I would ask that Senator Gardner be recognized at this time.
The senator from Colorado.
I thank the senator from Alaska. Thank you, Mr. President, for this opportunity to come to the floor to talk about what this chamber needs to do, along with the House, the president, to get this government reopened to fund border security, something that all Americans agree to, that we can walk and chew gum at the same time, that we can multitask, that we can find a way to fund priority spending on the border, that we can find a way to fund 800,000 government employees, including 53,000 federal employees in my home state of Colorado. In 2014, I was elected to the Senate. In November of 2014, we were dealing with the question of whether the government would shut down. In fact, the first issue that we were asked in the new Congress as we headed back into session was, would there be a looming shutdown over immigration? That's not 2018, 19. That was actually in 2014. Here's what I said then. There's no time, place, or purpose of a government shutdown or default. That's simply ridiculous and something that a mature governing body doesn't even contemplate. We ought to make it very clear that that's simply not acceptable. I said that in 2014. I echoed it in December of 2018, and I stand on the floor today sharing the same belief, sentiment, and value. We need border security in this country. We need to have barriers and structures on the border where it makes sense. As the President has said, he's made a reasonable request to put in place border security. But we also have a responsibility to the people of this country to govern responsibly. And that means not jeopardizing our economy, not jeopardizing the firefighters in Colorado who can't go to training right now because the government is shut down. My home state lost hundreds of homes last year due to wildfires. Think about the catastrophes in California, across the West last year. Firefighters from around the country were called up to do heroic things in saving entire towns. Yet those very training services, classes, and tools that they need for a fire season that could start any time are being denied the training and the classes that they need to save their own life, to save other lives, and to protect our land. We have farmers who are trying to get production loans right now. Can't get their production loans through certain offices because of the shutdown. Farming's not good right now, if anybody. The prices are so low right now. People are struggling. Talked to a farmer in Colorado yesterday. He doesn't know what the bank is going to say to him on Friday when he goes in tomorrow. He can't get a hold of anybody at the USDA because of the shutdown. We need border security. That's why I voted for both measures today. The $5.7 billion for border security and the continuing resolution proposal that contains the President's 2018 budget security or border security proposal. Both measures included border security. We can do this. It's not that difficult. It shouldn't be a challenge to govern responsibly. Shutdowns aren't the solution. Walking and chewing gum at the same time shouldn't be so difficult. And I hope that this chamber will come to its senses, along with our House colleagues and the White House, to move forward. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. President. I would now ask that the senator from Arizona be recognized.
The senator from Arizona.
Thank you, and I want to thank the Senator for Alaska for organizing this, and really both sides of the aisle, so that we can have our voices heard for those who we represent here on the Senate floor. Mr. President, I came yesterday from Yuma, Arizona, and the day before I was in Nogales, Arizona. I visited Nogales, the ports of entry, the CBP officers coming to work every single day now without pay. On Monday, they processed 2,000 trucks through the port of entry there. That cross-border commerce is so important for an economy like Arizona and jobs. And they also seized 18 kilograms of methamphetamine and heroin, fentanyl, that is contributing to the opioid crisis and the drug crisis in our country. Morale is pretty good because they still know how important it is for them to be there on the watch and doing their job. However, this is unacceptable, that they're being asked to come to work and not be paid. As was said by other colleagues, some of the lower-level officers, the younger individuals early on the job, they have no reserves. And I talked to several of them. They're very concerned about what's going to happen when they miss a second paycheck here in the next day. When I went to Yuma and talked to the Border Patrol, it was the same thing. They need to be on the job. They want to be on the job. They know how important it is for our country and for border security. I visited the place where just last week, 376 people were able to tunnel under, where we have a barrier they can't see through, so that they weren't able to see it until they actually had breached it. And they caught a couple of MS-13 gang members yesterday. Again, they're asking, please, let's secure our border. Let's provide the resources for the agents and for the officers and for what they need to do every single day. And let's open up the government so we can do these things. This is why America is so frustrated with Washington, D.C., why many of us ran to come here in the first place. We're like, what is the matter with you guys? Just get it together, get something through the House and the Senate that can be signed by the President to open up the government and secure our border. Let's roll up our sleeves, let's stay here all night, around the clock, and let's get this mission done. And I yield back.
The senator from Maryland.
Over the last hour, many of our colleagues have come to the floor, Democrats and Republicans, with different views about how we should deal with border security issues and how we should deal with the problems at hand, but a common willingness and commitment to reach a bipartisan agreement. In order for that to be accomplished, we need time. And therefore, we're following this afternoon a bipartisan amendment to the underlying bill that will provide 3 weeks for a continuing resolution for government to be open so that we can work together to deal with the border security issues. I agree with Senator King in his optimism that we will be able to reach an agreement. It's interesting that Senator King's an independent. Should not be a partisan problem on border security. We should be able to resolve the issues. I want to thank Senator Murkowski for her help in organizing this event. We've tried to work in a truly bipartisan manner in order to give optimism, and I think rightfully so, that we can solve this issue if we have the time to do it. I would urge all of our colleagues to join us in this effort. Let's open government. Let's have 3 weeks. Let's all be committed to deal with border security in the manner in which this institution in the past has been able to deal with tough issues. With that, Mr. President, I want to thank again my colleague from Alaska, and I'll yield back the balance of my time.
Mr. President.
The senator from Alaska.
Mr. President, I want to thank my colleague from Maryland and all the senators on the Republican side and the Democrat side who came to the floor after these 2 votes to express this air of optimism that we can figure this out. One of the things that I heard very clearly from both sides is enough already. Enough already, because that's what the American people are saying about this shutdown. Enough already. Figure it out. Well, we got the message. We know what the mission is, and I think what you've seen expressed here on the floor is the goodwill and the good faith that will be extended in these hours and days going forward, knowing that there is an urgency to get the government open and to address the legitimate priorities that the President has outlined. With that, Mr. President, I yield the floor, and I would suggest the absence of a quorum.
Thank you, Mr. President. It has been